what if my whole self-worth or my peace and happiness all resided in how how much of an athlete my daughter was at this age, right? And all of a sudden she doesn't make the cut, and so I'm like upset with the coach, and then I'm jealous of other parents whose kids made the team. And it's like you have to just be at peace.
Welcome to This Whole Life, a podcast for all of us seeking sanity and sanctity, and a place to find joy and meaning through the integration of faith and mental health. I'm Kenna Malay, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm happy to bring you this podcast along with my husband, Pat Malay, a Catholic speaker, musician, and leader. We invite you to our kitchen table. Okay, not literally, but you're definitely invited into the conversations that we seem to keep having once the kids have scattered off to play and we're left doing the dishes. We're excited to share this podcast for educational purposes. It's not intended as therapy or as a substitute for mental health care. So let's get talking about this whole life.
I'm not gonna stand here with my friends down and out. I'm not gonna run when
Welcome back to This Whole Life, listeners. It is such a beautiful day and an awesome opportunity to share in conversation with my guest today, Rachel Balducci. Rachel, welcome to This Whole Life.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here.
And it is always a gift, too, to have a sweet Southern accent on our show. I am so partial to our guests from the South. So thanks for spanning the miles, Rachel, and being with us from your place in Georgia. For those of you who are not yet familiar with Rachel, she is the co-host of The Gist, which is a talk show for women on Catholic TV, and she teaches journalism at Augusta University. She's also the author of Make My Life Simple, Bringing Peace to Heart and Home, and How Do You Tuck in a Superhero, and other delightful mysteries of raising boys. Rachel and her husband, Paul, live in Georgia and have 5 sons and 1 daughter. And Rachel, one of my favorite things is that you always post on social media that picture of your daughter being born after that, caravan of 5 sons, and just the beauty and the awe in your face. So welcome, Rachel.
Good morning, Kenneth. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rachel, I am excited about this conversation because I have learned so much from you in the realm of parenting and in becoming more freely and authentically a daughter of God. But before we get into that and I share, kind of what inspired me to reach out to you, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a high and a hard of life lately, just to help folks get to know about what's going on in your world these days.
Sure. So we were talking before we started recording that I live in Augusta, Georgia, and we recently got hit pretty hard by Hurricane Helene. So that was a big deal, very unexpected. God's here in the midst of all of it with us, but that was tough, to lose power, to have your sort of whole town shut down, just all of that. It really, and I think because for us, we really literally did not see it coming, like went to bed thinking it was heading in one direction. And in the middle of the night, it sort of just came to us. So, such a shock to the system in that regard. But there were so many beautiful things that came out of that, like neighborhoods coming together, people always just kind of rise to the occasion. So that was challenging, but also beautiful. And, the good, so I'm pursuing a PhD in religion at the University of Georgia. And I'm halfway through my first semester. And yes, later today, as soon as we're done with this podcast, I have to start working on like this 20-page paper. And so I've been putting it off and talking a lot about it instead of doing any writing.
Okay.
I'm super nervous about it. It's like a good challenge. But anyway, I am enjoying that so much. And so each week I drive up there 2 days a week and I have classes, and it is just such a fun new adventure for me. that I kind of consider that like a high in the midst of really excellent things in family life and all that good stuff too. But I'm really enjoying this new adventure. So.
Oh my gosh. Just like so much admiration for, you getting back in the classroom and being on the other side, right? Because you're often in the classroom, but as the instructor, as the professor, incredible, incredible.
Yeah, it's a fun, like it kind of is mind games where like 2 days a week I'm the professor here in town, and then the other two I'm a student. And it's neat that there's that ability with your brain to be like, no, you're not in charge today. Today
Yeah.
you're just sitting,
Yes.
and you're not talking as much, It's
yes. And when I was in school to become a marriage and family therapist, one of the things that they said is like, if you aren't already engaged in therapy yourself or haven't had that experience, like get thee to a therapist now, because you need to know what it's like to be in that other seat, to become even better at your craft. And so, I'm imagining that your experience as student is only going to enhance also your presence as a professor.
Yes, thank you. I can see that already even. I mean, I really am learning like so much in so many different areas. So it's wonderful.
Oh, love it. Well, I will start with my high, which is that Pat and I we're coming out of a season, like an inordinately busy season of travel, in particular for work. We just got back the day before yesterday from Alaska and had never been there before, never dreamed, honestly, that I would go there. And it was as beautiful as people said. And we weren't even there necessarily in its like peak season. But literally saw like a black bear cub like on the side of a cliff as we were driving, and Pat ran into a family of moose outside of the school where he was speaking. Like it was just unreal. But more than that, the high was the people, and the high was learning about their lifestyle, which is so different than ours. And therefore, like just how much more difficult it is for them to have access to the sacraments, for their priests to get to all of these different towns, that many of which are only accessible by like ferry and airplane, and they call them snow machines. They don't call them snowmobiles. We call them snowmobiles here in Minnesota, but snow machines. And just feeling so edified by their like heroic faith and their hunger for the sacraments. That was such a high. And I just feel infused with like how am I demonstrating my love for the Lord? Seeing them do it on the day in and day out. So that was such a gift. The hard, and actually maybe I'm realizing Rachel could be a segue too into things that I'd like us to be able to talk about today, is our children are getting older. Our oldest is 13, almost 14. Our youngest is 4. And walking with them as they experience disappointment and rejection and setback is so stinking difficult. I think like I know how it feels for me when I'm being told like, no, like you're not the right person for the job, or not the right, as a grown up, I know how difficult that is. And so for this to be happening to my little people, who are coming of age, but also like, I just feel that so deeply, and I'm trying to figure out, maybe the hard is like my own process for what to do when that happens. So that we as a family can engage with it in like a healthy way, and in a way that brings forth like learning and virtue, and there's fruit in it. So, that is a definite hard, of life lately for me. So yeah, kind of maybe letting that be a springboard. Rachel, I mentioned to you when I reached out to you that I've been following you on social media, been aware of your writing and your recording, for many years now. And I think, so on my personal Instagram, I follow maybe like 10 people because I just like, am super particular about the kinds of messages that I'm willing to like let come into my world, because I receive a lot already. And you have been a tried and true, like historically in my carousel of voices that I allow in, because Rachel, you have this way of being humble that actually invites my vulnerability. I think I find when I leave reading things that you write or record, I love your laundry talks while you fold your laundry, and like I find myself actually being reflective, and so that leaves me in a warmer place, in a place that like orients me toward the Lord. So first of all, just thank you for that.
Wow.
Thanks
Yeah,
for that
thank
ministry.
you. I feel so
Yeah.
honored by your kind words.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. And I encourage parents, I mean, all humans, but really parents, in particular, like, to check out, Rachel's, writings and recordings. But in that humility and that candor, like, I'm curious, like, how did you even choose to go there in such a public way? Because that's not a lot of what we're seeing in the world, and certainly on social media, right? Filters and like presenting your best self and all that. Can you share a bit about like what moved you to really embrace that humility and that transparency with people you don't even know?
Yeah. Well, thanks again. Such kind words. So before Instagram, I had a blog, Testosterone, and that's kind of what kind of got me, a little bit of a following. Is my story briefly is my husband and I had 4 boys in 5 years. So every 21 months we had a new little boy. Crazy times. Like as a young bride, I did not set out to do that, and and it has been just like the greatest blessing. And then fast forward a bit, but after 5.5 years, I really thought like, okay, I'm barely surviving with this pack of boys. So we got really good at NFP. And then after 5.5 years, I was like, I want one last baby. Cause by then I was in my mid-30s. I had all those boys in my 20s. And we had a 5th son, and I was like, we're good, like in riches, And then 3 years later, surprise, and we had Isabel. And that's the picture that you shared about that we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl, and she's just a delight. So I started blogging when the youngest of our 4 boys was about 2 years old, and not everybody had blogs at that point. But I was finding that motherhood was not what I thought it was going to be. Like I really envisioned, I'm the oldest of 8, but I never saw myself as capable of having a large family. So in my mind, I was just kind of like, I'm going to have motherhood is like a boy and a girl, right? Like just a very simplified approach. And we ended up with this pack of boys, and it was crazy. And it was like, I lost whatever false sense of like control that I had. And so to your question, Kenna, I think early on, I sort of had humility dumped on me I didn't get this, I don't think, a false sense of like, my excellent parenting is what is making my children behave properly, because boys were we'd go places and they would go in all directions, no matter what I asked them to do before we went into, And so I didn't have this sense of like, I'm so organized, and, I have such a tidy home, and I run a tight ship, and my children behave. And I think I'm just getting over a little bit of envy that I have when I see children who behave in public, and not that I had feral children, but this feeling of like, going to mass and them just sitting in this row participating. I mean, my boys would be like, like, when's it going to be over? That sort of thing. So I started to blog because I wanted, I just kind of had this moment where I'm like, I'm either going to laugh or cry at the end of every day. And I'd rather laugh and find like, where is the Lord in the midst of this, and kind of recognizing the gift of motherhood. And so this is not a thing to just be endured, but an area to grow in holiness. I don't know that I had those words for it at that point, but this feeling of, this is the thing God is having me do. How do I find joy, in these circumstances? So I started blogging, and I found, because I had all boys and my blog had a clever name, Testosterone. And I wrote like in a hyper-focused way, like life with boys and my challenges with it. As a woman, I'm raising these people that are so different than me,
Yeah.
and I heard from so many women who were in that same boat of like, this is foreign to us. This is overwhelming. This is not what we thought motherhood was going to look like. And so I think kind of, I think vulnerability comes from this understanding that we're not the only ones. I like that
Hmm.
CS quote, like friendship is born when somebody says, me too, and this
Yes.
feeling of, I'm not, if it's true for me, it's probably true for other people. And then, my own experience with, looking into a sea of blogging and now social media and seeing a lot of perfection out there. And it doesn't make me feel great, and I'm like, I want for my own voice in this sea of voices to be somebody that's like encouraging women in particular, but encouraging people to remind us that the Lord is with us as we walk through whatever it is we're going through. So that's kind of how I got to that point. I think the other thing that was beneficial for me is that in my real life, I have a core group of friends that we're really honest with each other. And so I always
Hmm.
had this sense of reality outside of like the perfect pictures that we see online.
Yeah.
And so it helped me to know, like, I'm tempted to buy into this image of perfection, but nobody in real life is living none of my close friends are living at this level.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling this isn't really true for these other people too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's such a challenge. I mean, like, just what we see can be really overwhelming, with like the cute homes and the well-behaved children. And like for me, I think I even get more challenged with the, like, now the aesthetic vibe is a thing. Like, I know if I'm looking at, a picture, it's like somebody does a good job of decorating, whatever. I think it's really hard. Like, what does social media tell us about ourselves? Like, where is my sense of self being built or eroded? And when we see families that seem like they really have it all together, like kids that
Yeah.
make only good choices, kids that are included, you're talking about like watching your kids go through hard times, like, kids families whose children don't seem to question faith issues, all of these areas where we might feel insecure. And like for me, I'm like, I don't want to let it all hang out. I don't want to be a train wreck, but I want people to know real life, like
Yeah.
to be encouraged in these real areas. Like nobody's perfect. Nobody has it all together. We're all just trying to do the best we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so a couple things that makes me curious about Rachel. One is, can you say a bit, you talk about this group of real life friends and this level of vulnerability and honesty that you found with each other. Can you share a bit about, yeah, how do we foster that? Like, what have you learned helps us to seek out such people and to invest in such relationships so that they can be, kind of these homing devices of truth and of goodness in our lives?
Yeah. We as humans were built for community of some sort. Now, my husband and I, we've sought it intentionally. Like we're part of this group of people that have sort of intentionally we live next to each other. We're kind of committed to being here. It's a group that's been around for about 50 years. It's a thing that happened in the life of the church, just very briefly. Part of something called the charismatic renewal that happened in the late 60s and early 70s, within the Catholic Church. And so we kind of were the beneficiaries of that because my husband and I both kind of grew up in this scene, right? You can have that wherever you go, but you have to build it. And it's
Mm,
not enough to just kind of pop in and out of mass on Sunday, and feel supported by people. So like, how do you build community, get to know families, invite them over, do things outside of church? And some parishes are great at this and some just are not. Like
hmm.
Protestants do way better at this than Catholics. That's just,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And so like, but finding families, and it doesn't have to be people who are in the same exact season as you. Like one of the things that I love is that I've got people, yes, in the trenches, and now I'm in a different kind of trench than I was when my kids were little. So, I'm relating to people who are have little kids, and then like, the stage you're at, like the 4 to
Mm-hmm.
13. And then I've got people who are empty nesters, and man, those are the women I want to talk to. The ones who are like, they raised their kids, the kids turned out good,
Let me sit at your feet.
share that wisdom with me. Yeah. So like that multi-generational relating. And then the big thing is, what's the heart of all of this? It is that vulnerability. And it's just a willingness to share real life. I think about Irma Bombach and how she was like, if I waited to have people over until all the silverware was matching, like I'd never have anybody over. And for
Yeah.
years I struggled with that. Like I've got all these little boys, and without fail, every time I would have a guest about to come over, either a 2 liter of Sprite would spill on the kitchen floor, or I'd walk into the bathroom and someone would have peed everywhere. And it's easy to feel like I'm not worthy to have people enter under my roof, and
Yes.
it's like we have to get over ourselves, and I think you start to have that support of like, yeah, this is me. And, and everybody has different levels, where like I tend to keep a tidy house, but I had all these crazy boys that were not going to sit at the dining room table the whole time that we had guests over,
Yeah.
So like getting to that place where, and I think I love how full circle the Lord is in our lives. Like the more secure I am in who God made me to be, the more I can share that gift of self with other people, like being like loving who God made me to be. And that's not cocky. That's just like a deep security in who I am in the Lord, which means I can share myself and not be so fearful that, that I'm showing a part of myself that somebody else can't handle, or I'm not good enough. And then the big thing is knowing where our identity really lies. Like, I'm grateful for friendships that are not built on the kind of cars that we drive, or the cutest, who has the latest furniture in their front room. There's nothing wrong with that. I love cute stuff. I'm all about, just got some new shoes yesterday that came in the mail, and I'm excited about it, it was so fun because I ran into a friend, and we always share that kind of stuff with each other. And she'd just gotten the same pair in a different color. Like that's wonderful. But it's not the basis of what we're doing. We're not trying to impress somebody with our vacations and our, anything like that. None of those things are bad, but friendship and support needs to be based on something deeper than that. And so to your point, like find real people, and they don't even have to look exactly like you. But, if y'all have Jesus in common, that's going to get you really far. Like that support. And, getting back to this idea of parenting, so now I've got our 4 oldest, my pack of boys, they're all in their 20s now. 2 are done with college. 2 are still in their college journey. Actually, 3 are still in their college journey, but we got 2 done with college, undergrad. And I've gone through hard stuff with them. Like we've walked through hard stuff as parents. And to have friends, I'm going to get a little choked up, who love you in the good times is awesome, but who are there for you in the hard times, but also it's like sometimes people are happy to be there in the trenches, but if you have success, that they're threatened by that. I want to be loved when the highs are high, but the lows are low. And like in one situation, we didn't realize that our one child was struggling, and it was some of our closest friends that had to come to us and say, I just want you to know I'm hearing this from my kids, and I hate to have to tell you. And that changed everything because I'm so grateful that they they knew we would love them no matter what, that, that they were willing to risk us being upset with them for telling us this hard thing. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. Like, we can't do this parenting thing alone. And I think for people listening to this, and I know that can be hard, a lot of people feel lonely and isolated. And I think, unfortunately, that's kind of our culture, is ask the Lord to send you people, like we don't, even finding the people, we don't have to just, I've got to find somebody. I've got to be looking at church like, Lord, send somebody into my life who can encourage me and walk beside me, in this time in family life. And I think God is faithful to those prayers.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, he's made us for community, right? He himself is a community of love in the Trinity. And so to be made in his image and likeness is to be made for that. And so to trust that he will provide, because it's what he's wired us for. Yeah, it's a longing that we have, and he wants to satisfy our thirst. So yeah. I want to come back, Rachel, to, kind of, yeah, you're touching on this theme of perfection. And I'm aware, right now, to be perfectly honest, in my own life, I'm doing a deep dive, recognizing like this is a season that the Lord is asking me to really look at that. And I think it's difficult because the pursuit of excellence, that's like the nicest way I can talk about perfection, but like the pursuit of excellence has like gotten me places, right? Like it has served me well in certain things. And also, as my children get older, I am learning that it is no longer as helpful of an approach to life, as the things that I care more and more deeply about are less and less in my control, i.e. my husband and my children, right? They are not mine to control, or at least we are not going to be happy for long if mama tries to control all of you.
Yeah.
And so I guess, yeah, asking you, you're ahead of me on this timeline of motherhood. Like what is your own walk with recognizing that your children, your husband are distinct from you? They are separate from you. They have a story. The Lord has a plan and a purpose for them that is separate from your great ideas. And I'm sure you had great ideas about who they should be and how they should live.
Yes, exactly. And you're at such a, I think, crucial place with this. Like I love that the Lord is bringing this to your attention, and it's like circumstances bring it to our attention as well. But like, the Lord offers us so much grace, I think. And I've seen this in my life when I'm really working to be in tune with where the Lord's leading me, then he pours out the grace as we walk through these new seasons. And like 14, when your oldest hits that age, it is hard because all of a sudden, okay, think even about friends. We want to guide our children to have good friends. When they're little, we set up play dates. We control everything. And all of a sudden it's like, they get older, and it's not even whether they have good friends or bad friends. It's either, do they get included all the time? Do they make the team? Did they do as well in this tryout as they wanted, and watching them, crash and burn or fly. The heart of freedom in this area I found, and it did take me a while. Okay. So I talk a lot about like this idea of like the boys were kind of crazy, and so like a bit of like watching, like I couldn't control certain things, but even within that, I had this false sense of like, these children of mine were extensions of me, and you love your children so much, and you only want what's best for them. And I remember years ago, like, I think I was like around the age of, I'm trying to think how this like lines up. Okay. Early 40s, not that many years ago, I should say, but like being in this place where I was looking at one of my boys, and I realized I wanted him spiritually to be like 42-year-old Rach. I wanted him to start where I currently was. I didn't want him to have to wander in the desert or, suffer to be separated from the Lord.
Yeah.
And I realized he and each of my children are on their own journey. Now we give them the formation. We work hard to raise them in a home that knows and loves and serves Jesus. But that doesn't mean that spiritually and emotionally and psychologically, as a therapist, I'm sure you can appreciate this, that they're not going to have their own stuff to work through. Like, just because I've sat in therapy and spiritual direction and years of growth as a person spiritually, that doesn't mean the Balduccis start there and then they just are catapulted, So that was a big thing, is like, you get to this point where you're with your children as they get older, where Paul and I recognized our job is not to hold their hand, but to kind of stand on either side as like this buffer as the lanes widen. and they're figuring out where they want to be on this path, right? And you're like, okay, the path goes this way, and we're working very hard to continue to help you go in that direction. But if they pop off the path, or hop off the path, or if they are like winding like this, that we're there as they figure out what it is they want their life to look like, and having conversations, being willing to dialogue with your kids, but also not getting to say, like, as a 2-year-old, you pop them on the hand before they touch the stove. And now it's kind of like, well, how's that working out for you? How are these things that you're doing working out for you? And then them coming to some conclusions. Like, I'll tell you real quick a story. One of our boys was dating somebody, and it just wasn't, they didn't need to be dating this person. And my husband and I, one night in the kitchen, this is, they were in college. And so of course we're like, we're not going to tell you no, but we're going to tell you what we see and the fruit of it in your life, loving. And they always have to know that you love them and you're there for them. Like, you don't want your kids afraid to tell you things. And so that's where that love that you have for them is like, I love you. We just want the best for you. This isn't about us saving face and us not looking bad. Right. But we're telling him all this stuff, and he's listening, and then a few weeks later, he went on some camping trip with a bunch of his friends, and they basically told him the same thing. And he was able to kind of see, but he told us later, they told me all the same stuff, but you're my parents. And it was like,
daggone it.
It's like, he was hearing it, but he kind of wanted some confirmation from not his parents, like, life's funny that way. But it, like, as your kids get older, you do have to start to have this understanding, and it is a painful understanding, I think, that they are not extensions of you, that they are themselves, and they are the Lord's, and always to remember that the Lord, Jesus, loves my kids more than I ever could, which is hard to understand, and that brings me a lot of peace when I feel like things are out of my control. And then the last thing I want to say about this is, I remember hearing a series of tapes years ago, and it was about detaching with love. And it was this idea, and at that point my kids were little, so I can't even remember what was motivating me to listen to this, but it was this idea of people who, when they mess up, what comes of that. And I remember the priest, Father Emmerich Vaught, he was the speaker of this series. And he talked about a man that he saw in therapy who came in, who was in his 30s, and he had never experienced failure. And he was hitting some big bad wall. Like, he had been top of this, top of that, gotten everything he wanted, the jobs that he wanted, the school success he wanted. And then it was kind of like he had this breakdown, and I just remember the details of the story being like, the small failures that we experience and that our kids experience are so important. And so we, as the mama, want to protect them from everything. I never want them to feel, but I don't want them to get too far along in life without experiencing pinchy. And it's hard to watch, but it's like, can I remember in those moments, the Lord has a plan, and not that he wants to watch us suffer, but he uses everything for good. Nothing is wasted with the Lord. And, kind of releasing the tight grip that we falsely think we have. And, and kind of saying, like, bring me peace, Jesus, walk with my child in this time, reveal yourself to this child as they walk through this, help them know that they're not alone, and it's scary and it's hard because we just want to protect our kids from everything. And that's not healthy. I think dads are better about it. My husband always seems to have a little bit better sense of perspective, but I'm like, oh, it just feels so personally painful for me to watch them struggle.
Well, and so from my vantage point, right, on the clinical side of things, I think too, it's not just like the suffering of watching your child experience hard things and losing perspective of the bigger picture, but it's also how my own sense of worth gets wrapped up in what my children do or don't do, right? Whether they keep the faith as an adult, whether they have a career that I feel like is really maximizing their gifts and their talents and living up to their potential, whether they choose a spouse or, a vocation, receive a vocation that I feel like is really reflective of what I want for them. Can you speak to that in particular? Like, I don't know if you struggled with that. I know my clients do. I do, just that fuzziness. Like you said, not being extensions of ourself, but how do we do that? How do we make that shift of really giving them that freedom and that permission, and to not take it so stinking personally when they do things that we're like, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. And then you're like, and everybody knows that the whole neighborhood saw that. No.
Yes. Currently, here's my goofy version of it, Rachel. Currently, our kids, right? So we have a girl, 3 boys, and then 3 girls. And our 3 girls came in a year. We had identical twins, and then we had another baby like 4 days before their first birthday. Oh, and so they just have a fearlessness that in our suburban neighborhood, which most families have 1 or 2 children, these other families do not understand when the Malays come marching. So our girls will unabashedly just knock on every door, not only asking to play with their children, but then saying, could I just play with your toys? Like, you have that Jeep, like, buggy thing, and we don't have one of those. So, like, could I just play with your toys? And I'm like getting text messages from neighbors like, do you know that your girls are at my door? And I'm like, sure didn't. Like, so that is my version of the embarrassment of like, you did what?
Oh my gosh.
So
yes,
anyhow.
I love that. Totally reminds me of a story. Like, when the boys were little and a friend drove by our house and, we got this call and he's like, did you know that your boys are all standing on the top of the truck, beating it with plastic bats? And we look out and they're all like standing in our driveway, hitting the car. We're like, yeah, no, we did not know. We're just trying to live a normal life here,
Thanks for that PSA.
I know. And it like, I think a couple of things here. One, in these moments, you have to we can't take ourselves too seriously. And I have that same tendency, kind of like the little perfectionist, like, I just, can't y'all just keep it down? Like, hide that stuff, shove those feelings down. No, and so like that, and that was a big part for me of, the writing helped me just find the humor in things. And, and then that detachment from others' opinions. Like, again, I love how they're like, Jesus really is the answer no matter what the question is. And I don't want to say that I'm over spiritualizing, but like, okay, the greater truth of this idea of children getting older, choosing their own paths, they're no longer little people that we may or may not have been able to control. Sounds like you have a similar experience with me of like, a false sense of control, because I didn't think I could even control their behavior, but I still had this sense of like, but the bigger issues are still in my control. Like K through 12 is like dropping you off at school, or whatever, like we're doing, and then we move on to the next thing, and then we move on. And it was kind of like a shock to the system as people got older, and there were these elements of their life that were no longer in my direct control. I'll, give you the most sort of extreme example of what we went through is like this son that went off to college and just crashed and burned. And I can share about it now because he's doing great. His journey, like, he had to walk through a lot, and it caught me by surprise. It was a shock to my system because I really did think we had done everything so well that we were sort of guaranteed, this was like, the child who like Eagle Scout class president, all that good stuff. And it's like, he had to figure himself out outside of the Paul and Rachel Balducci. And I kind of was like, I'm not really interested in that. I'm more interested in you just doing the stuff in a, and kind of like having, and I think about this, like these tight fists that I think we have with like our sense of our families, other people's opinions, not wanting our kids to be in pain, like all the things we try to control. And it's like the Lord asks us to kind of let go of this tight grip of
Yeah.
certain things in the right time. And that's what's challenging as parents, is that when our kids are little and when they're in our care, there's so many
Mhm.
things we can't give up on. You know, we
Yep.
kind of do this the hard way. Like Henry's 5 years younger, 6 years younger than the next brother up. And I kind of noticed when Henry was 2 and 3, I sort of like let him kind of hang with the older boys at bedtime. And it's like a 2-year-old should be in bed at 7, not 10, not 9. And well, all the other brothers were older, right? Like, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm still in a different level of control with this child. Or, like when he was 7 and the other guys were teenagers, right? Like, oh, I have to control him in a different way or have tighter boundaries, So it is a challenge because we're not used to letting go of this control, but the heart of it really is my identity and self-worth wrapped up in not even just what my kids are doing, but other people's opinion of me. Because if we really think about it, I think it's equal parts. We want them to use the gifts God has given them, to use the brain God has given them, but am I getting that confused with, well, what will people say? What will they say when my kid takes a gap year, which turns into 3 gap years? You have to get over that. Like I think the most important thing is, am I a sounding board for my child? Am I encouraging them to be the best person they can be? And am I getting out of the way? Like, I think I was really motivated at times to have my kids do things. Yeah. Cause I was worried about what it looked like. You can't take a break from college. You got to get right back in there. I was always like, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards,
Yeah.
Well, it's like, but I'm not in control of that. What journey is this child on? And again, there are going to be hard seasons where we have to speak truth to our kids. And I think that's where the 4 foundational years of building trust with your children, having healthy boundaries, but knowing that you love them, and they're willing to come to you when they mess up.
Yeah.
That's what we're building, because, 10 years from now,
right.
I want to be, can they come and talk to me about stuff that's out of my control, but I'm here. We're here for them.
Yeah. When the stakes are higher.
Yes.
My Pat's maternal grandmother says, like, little people, little problems, big people, big problems. And like, I try to remind myself of that, of when I don't feel like doing the hard things when they're little, like reminding myself there are no loopholes in this parenting gig. Like if I'm not teaching them the reality of natural consequences, for example, or allowing natural consequences to unfold, like they're going to have to learn it somehow. And maybe it'll be through the legal system. Like, who knows? Like if I don't allow them to live in reality here. I think you're bringing up a couple things, Rachel, that are helpful. Number one is your acknowledgement that, like, I call this process like interior confrontation. Like if I'm really honest with myself, the control around, but it's just so hard for me to not see them live up to their potential, has so very much to do with others' opinions, has so much more to do with what others will think of them/me, right? Because I'm still in that place of like enmeshment, and thinking that my children are like my resume walking around in this world, like reflecting my goodness and my competency as a mom, as a parent. So that's one thing of just, I'm hearing this gentle challenge from the Holy Spirit right now in me of like, kind of like, it's time to be real about like, what is that honestly? What is that truthfully? The other thing, I heard this the other day, and I won't say it as eloquently, but it was something to the effect of, don't stand in the way of your child's testimony. And so just this, what you're describing with this son, right? That, God willing, in the rearview mirror, he is going to see this like beautiful mosaic of how the Lord has walked with him and given him these parents who've been faithful to him through the highs, through the lows. And it's going to be his witness to God's goodness and to Christ's presence in his life. But when we snowplow, when we helicopter, when we bubble wrap them, like we prevent them from really getting to experience God's grace, which I know in my life, like I have umpteen accounts of how the Lord has been merciful to me and has been there for me when I absolutely wasn't deserving of it. And that strengthens my faith. I am rarely impressed by someone who's like, yeah, like being good, being faithful just always come really easy to me. Like I've never questioned anything. Like, it's just all come natural. Like, no, like I am in awe of people who are like, I have seen some things and I still choose Jesus. So yeah, just a few things to kind of pick up on and underscore for myself and for our listeners. 'Cause I think, yeah, clearly, Rachel, like you've taken the time to reflect and to kind of distill like what is true, what is good. Maybe the last thing I'll say off of what you just shared. I was in confession, and I sometimes, admittedly, like I'm a choleric melancholic. So when you talk about tight fists, like I don't know how to walk without a tight fist. Like I know control and pursue, do, keep going, keep marching. But I was talking to this priest that I often go to for confession. And sometimes I'm like, Father, you just need to be like a little more firm with me. Like you just need to be a little more tough on me. But he was talking about, I'm sure I was confessing something related to anger and my children. And he said, Kenna, like, discipline is important. And he's one of 13 kids. He's on the older side of 13 kids. And so he's like watched his parents, raise a baby from infancy on. And he said, like, discipline is important and it is a way of showing love. And so long as your children know that you love them, you will be able to measure out the discipline that's necessary for the situation, right? Which is not telling me I can just like let my anger run rampant. But to your point of like, do they know that I love them? And then we can have these hard conversations. Then they can have the freedom to come to me in these difficult moments. I can have that sense of detachment, and we talk about it as differentiation in therapy, and to not be immune to the pain, but to not take it as such a personal blow, and to not be so hyper concerned with what are the neighbors going to say about this?
Because I think that when we're motivated by that, by our vanity, by what other people think, it's going to get us in trouble because it's a disordered way of thinking. And it's an easy, understandable way of thinking. It's very understandable. And I think, I struggled for years with this idea of like with my own personality type, that other people's opinions about things was feedback for me on how I was doing. Like, well, how do I know if I'm doing well unless other people give me that feedback? And I had to unpack some stuff, but so it's understandable. Like we're not little silos, we're going through life getting feedback from people around us. But it's like, if I'm like looking around to other people every time my kids mess up or, in my own life, even it's an exhausting way to live, and I love how really that gets back to, okay, as followers of Jesus, we have to have that personal connection with him that speaks truth into our self-worth and who we are, and I think about this, like, even if as moms, our kids completely toe the line and they move on through and they've done everything perfect. Okay. If my whole identity is wrapped up in being a wife and a mom, which are the two most important things I do, but if that's where my sense of self-worth and how, that's where all of my truth comes from, I'm here to tell you, kids grow up. And I know you can't believe it because when they're all little, you're like, it's always going to be this way, this pack of people in my roof, under my roof. As my kids get older, I'm like, I remember what a shock to the system it was for me to grocery shop by myself the first few times. And I'm like, gosh, I was used to getting so much attention. Well, it's because I was walking through a store with like 5 little boys, hanging off my cart, a little boy in the front and, people making comments and me trying to, and I had gotten used to that as my identity. I'm driving this big 12-passenger van and I'm, now I have a little girl and this pack of boys and, And then as they started to grow older, I'm like, it's weird for me. This is like the most basic example, but apply this to all other areas. Like I'm walking through the store by myself and I'm just this kind of invisible person now, right? Like not this mom that has all these people. It was very hard for me. And I still have those people. They're in my life. They're just not going with me everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a big deal to shift from driving a 12 passenger van to a cute, normal SUV, but my van is like a big part of my identity. And I love that the Lord offers us more than that. Like in the season that we're in, there's grace to do that. And there's a lot of joy, but that because, I'm a mama with 5 boys and a girl, well, that doesn't make me less of a person as my children get older and no longer live in the house and no longer need carpool rides everywhere and, or rides to all the things. And like who we are is so much more than just like the season that we're in. And so if we can remember that, as our kids go through hard stuff, and as they go through good stuff, the years of my boys being, the Balducci boys out on the basketball court, a couple of them could dunk, like they were, that was a fun season, but life goes on when you phase out of that. And you can kind of be like, that was a wonderful time. And this new season that we're in is also wonderful. And, and I remember kind of watching that because I would see women who really mourned the loss of that family time. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but I don't want to feel like when the last child has graduated, that life is over and I'm just sitting around missing the glory days. Like, what's the next thing that God has for me? And I think what's really beautiful about that is like for the season you're in, where you're a long time from that, now my youngest 2 are in high school, so I'm very kind of aware of it, is you can enjoy where you're at, but then every single high and low that your kids have, your personal happiness is not hinged upon that. You're like, we're sojourners and I love my kids, but again, they're not extensions of me. They are their own,
Yeah. I had a therapist who was like, I think a lot of focus can be on like, oh, you've got to be less affected by the lows. But I've heard you say this several times today, Rachel, like, but you've also got to be less affected by the highs. Like, that if we're going to have stability, if we're going to have some sense of like constancy with the Lord, detachment in both directions. That's actually where we find our true identity. That's actually where we find our grounding. Because I've totally, kid makes a touchdown in a game and then gets benched the next game. I'm like, like I'm just like all over the place. So gotta have that, sense of detachment. And what it means then, it raises that question, like, well, what am I going to be attached to? And you're saying Jesus, like Jesus in all things, right? Like, and so then you can receive, what comes and what goes in the season, in the moment, in the stage, in the good, exciting stuff and in the hard, irksome stuff. If he is the constant, then we do find stability. We do find peace, that the world can't offer. So,
and it impacts so many other things. I'm thinking, as you're talking about, the sports stuff too. Isabel, is just starting high school and she didn't make the varsity volleyball team. She made the JV. And my kids go to a small school. And it was funny because she didn't seem to care. We were on vacation when we found out. And I found myself tempted to be miffed about it, but kind of like thankfully had enough and have been doing the parenting thing long enough to be like, okay, the world is bigger than this. There's a lot more going on in life than just this. But it was funny because, if your thinking is disordered in this area, like there's a way that could have impacted my relationships with the coach, other parents. Like, what if my whole self-worth or my peace and happiness all resided in how much of an athlete my daughter was at this age, right? And all of a sudden she doesn't make the cut. And so I'm like upset with the coach. And then I'm jealous of other parents whose kids made the team. And I'm upset with the girls who maybe have the place that my daughter could have. And it's like, you have to just be at peace. Like, and I'm not even saying the Lord allowed it. It's just like, but I know, like God's in the midst of all these things, but it's kind of like, this is the situation and we have to be at peace with it. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. So, being at peace with that, and then fast forward, and there ended up being a game where she got pulled in and got to play a bunch in this one varsity game because she's tall. And it's the same thing you're saying. It's like, then it'd be easy to be like, wow, look how great. So it's
Yeah.
like we
Yeah.
celebrate the goodness, but also we don't walk around strutting after that and being like, look at this great.
Yeah.
It's like just humble gratitude for all of it. And I know I'm saying all these things theoretically. I get the temptation, and that's where like I'm able to be really honest with my husband too and be like, it was a little bit hard for me that she didn't make the team. And he tends to be more like, she's only in ninth grade,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in that same feeling of like, I don't want her to have this sense of like, not ever having struggles, like
Mm-hmm.
for when the good stuff comes, you're grateful for it instead of just feeling like
Yeah.
everything is owed to you, that's
Right. You're
not a healthy place
entitled.
to be. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Rachel, this feels like a good moment to pivot into our challenge by choice. I'm curious, like what you want to draw out of this and encourage our listeners to take up, to take all of this to heart and move it forward into their lives.
Sure. So I always like to mention every time I can something I heard from a priest years ago at a very formative point in my family life. And I was at this point where I was hungering for something. And I didn't know at the time, but it was really God just drawing me closer to him. And it was at such a crazy time in family life that I knew it couldn't be me because I felt like I barely had time to notice anything. And there was some stirring that I had in me and now recognizes like God inviting me deeper, into the deep with him in prayer. And it was around this time that we had a priest who ended up being at our parish just for a year, but he was incredible. And I remember him saying in a homily one week, holiness is the best gift you can give your family. And, holiness really always is the answer. Now, that doesn't mean scrupulosity or some false sense of like never messing up, but here's the challenge that I want to offer, because this was so transformative for me, is getting to a place where we start to spend time in prayer. Now I know when I first started feeling this stirring in me, I'm like, if the house is quiet, that's dangerous, right? Like I'm not going to be like going off into a quiet room and shutting the door and, so I'm very like, I have not lost the sense of reality with all of this, but, even if we at the start of each day say, Lord, give me the desire to pray. Like, if you find that you want more, like, I don't even, maybe you don't even have that desire to spend time with the Lord, but it's like, give me that desire. And then for me, I started to say, show me during my day today, like I don't have a lot of control over the comings and goings. Show me when I can sit in your presence quietly. And once I started to pray that prayer, all of a sudden it would be like the boys would all be quietly playing, or like people would be napping and it would be quiet. And so instead of hopping on the computer, getting on my phone, it's like I could sit in that space even for 10 minutes. And I want to make this distinction. And I know not everybody necessarily like relates to the Lord in the same way. And I love that too. Like there's space for all of us. Some people feel really close to God when they're singing, and some people feel, in all these different ways. But the point of prayer is to start to make that connection with the Lord. Like in spiritual direction recently, my spiritual director started with a prayer that said, Jesus, you are our friend. And I love that. Like, do I operate out of a sense of the truth of God really loving me and being for me? We can't know that unless we spend time with our Savior who loves us. So, and I had this shift where I thought of prayer as sort of petitions, like, hey, kid is struggling here. I'm
as if God
about
doesn't know those things yet. Like, I'm here to inform you.
if I articulate it, then he'll know better, but feeling like prayer became this thing where it was like an airing of grievances almost, here's what's going on. And then of course I could not stop there. I'd have to, and here's how I think you should fix it,
Yes.
So if that's the level of our prayer life, that's why I didn't want to sit and pray, because it was like an anxiety inducing activity.
Mm.
Like, let me just fixate on what's not going well in my life right now.
Yeah.
Real prayer is going to the space within us that only the Lord has access to. Like, I love the reality of like, there is a place in me that is outside of what the world says about me, that is outside of the good or bad choices my children are making. It's outside of the mistakes that I've made. And it's a place that the Trinity dwells within me. And I get to be in this sacred space, with Jesus. And the more I can tune into that, the more I hear truth spoken to me about who I am. And then it becomes less about the victories and the failures of my kids or my own highs and lows. I know that I'm a person that exists outside of just the temporal things of my life.
Yeah.
And then we can go through our day with a real sense of like who we are in the Lord, and our sense of self comes from something so much deeper. And so my challenge is to be open to asking the Lord to, one, help me want to pray, Jesus, and then draw me closer to you, or help, God's always drawing us closer to him, but help me to be in tune with your leadings, and to get to that place where we can sit in the silence, with Jesus and hear him connect with us, feel his connection, feel his love. And when I started to do that, it really just changed everything for me. So that's my challenge is, to start to even just ask the Lord to reveal himself more.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you. Our kids will often ask me to sit in their room, like in the dark after I've tucked them in. And like you, Rachel, and any parent listening knows, bedtime feels like your like freedom bell is ringing. And like the last thing I want to do is like sit here and not do things. Like, do you know how many emails and how many dishes, and I want to hang out with your father, like, just all these things. But I'm thinking about like, might that be the way the Lord has been showing me lately, that he's been making a little space in the quiet when I know that they're not setting things on fire or, ding dong ditching the neighbors in their undies. We had that happen once. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I would love to close us in prayer, Rachel, to round out this conversation. So let's do that. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, you love us. You love us so deeply. You love us beyond our imaginings, and you love our children. You love our spouses. You love those that we care for so deeply, with great mercy and with perfect detached love. And so we ask, Lord, that you would give us the grace to be more conformed to that love, that really does will the good of the other as separate from us. And for the grace to receive that kind of love for ourselves, that we can really find our home in you, our sense of self, our sense of security, our peace, our joy may be in you, and that we can increasingly day by day, season by season, turn our time, turn our minds toward you, surrender ourselves more completely to you. I ask for your blessing upon Rachel and upon the Balducci family, upon her studies and in the ministries that you've entrusted to her. And I ask for your blessing on our listeners, Lord, that this conversation can bear beautiful fruit in their lives. And we entrust all of this to your good and holy name, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, Rachel, it has been an honor and such a gift. So thank you. I can only imagine, what our listeners will learn, how God will speak to them through your stories, through your humor, through your honesty. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been so much fun and just a beautiful conversation. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again for your continued faithfulness to this journey of sanity and sanctity. So until next time, connect with us on thiswholelifepodcast.com, through Facebook and Instagram, This Whole Life Podcast. And feel free to shoot us an email. Let us know how you are making more space to really receive your identity in the Lord, and therefore show up in your vocation even more fully, authentically, and freely. Until next time, God bless you.
You're not alone, you're not alone, you're not alone.
This Whole Life is a production of the Martin Center for Integration. Visit us online at thishwholelifepodcast.com.
You're not alone, you're not alone, you're not alone.
Always the hardest part is just getting started. So I'm just going to take a breath.